With record low levels of approval for both the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, there is clearly a lack of trust and disdain towards leadership in politics today. What will or should the major parties do to address this and fix their respective broken systems?
Trisha Jha.
I think developing some consistent principles would be a good start. I think the asylum seeker policy is actually, the asylum seeker debate is actually a very good example of this, in the sense that there's so little debate being had. I mean, it's one of the Border Force Act, in my view, is one of the nastier bits of bipartisanship that we've seen. But I think, quite opposed to what some people may think, I think the bigger problem with our political system is that fewer politicians are willing to say, this is what I believe and I'm going to stick to my guns on this, and accept that, you know, ideological differences are real and they're important. Like, you are selling a message to the Australian population. I mean, Australian voters have values, they have things they care about, and political parties should reflect this rather than some weird convergence that we have currently. And I think that is what is driving that kind of lacklustre leadership and political acumen that we're seeing generally.
So are you saying, you're saying that both sides lack principle? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am.
That's Greg Sheridan.
Well, look, Tony, I'd say to you honestly, I think both Tony Abbott and Bill Shorten are very good blokes, and they get a much bummer rap than they deserve. I think this latest series of attacks on Bill Shorten for being a moderate union leader are just barking mad. What do we want him to be, a mad, militant, crazy union leader? And I think...
So, I mean, just on that score, briefly, because we know that later this week he'll be appearing before a Royal Commission. I think it's supposedly going to be $80 million spent on that Royal Commission. Do you think that is a bridge too far? Do you think that is a political Royal Commission,
no,
as Labor is alleging?
No, I think there are irregularities in the union movement, but they're not in the part of the union movement that Shorten was in. And I think there's a case for better regulation about corporate union financial transactions. But one reason we're a better country than we might be is because we have a large slab of the union movement which has decent political values and wants its enterprises to succeed. The transport workers, the AWU, the shop assistants, and a number of others. But to answer your question directly, I think the whole, you know, without becoming too sort of grandiose about this, the whole of Western society is going through a crisis of belief and confidence in its own institutions. And I think we're far too cynical about our politicians. I haven't met an Australian politician who didn't go into the business to try to make life better for their fellow Australians. And I think we're far too negative about them, and we penalise them too much for trivial things. This attack on Bill Shorten reminds me of the insane attacks on Tony Abbott for allegedly not being a nice person when he was at university. There's a sort of grotesqueness to our public discourse now, which is trivial and cynical and nasty. And I think the politicians are more victims of it than progenitors.
We've got very little time left. You've just come from the home of democracy. A brief answer from you.
I think in Australia we have policies but not politics. And that is due to the fact that the politicians have become a profession of their own, totally autonomous to a certain degree, without organic connection with the society. Sometimes they become symptoms of the diseases of the society, instead parts of the solution for the diseases of the society. And unfortunately, coming from the birthplace of democracy, populism in most occasions becomes the worst policy in that respect, and lack, as we said before, Trisha, of vision for the future. Where we want to go from now, that's the important thing, instead of dealing with trivial issues, with symptoms of the disease instead of the disease itself.
We've got time for brief answers from our last two guests. Larissa.
Thank you, Xanthi. Excellent question. And I guess, like Greg, we're all just human. We do the best we can. But I know what I respond to is conviction and a long-term vision. And I'd love to see more of that being expressed in the Parliament. You see, so often it's about point scoring off the other person, off the 24-hour media cycle. And I think that really debases what could be a very noble and aspirational body that is our Parliament. So I'd like to see some more conviction, a bit more courage. And I think part of that is getting rid of the influence of vested interests through their donations on our political system. OK,
we're just about out of time. A brief answer, very brief.
Tony, an $80 million smear campaign on your political opponent is certainly a bridge too far, and that's what this Royal Commission is. But in answer to the question, I think we've got to be less worried about opinion polls, and we need to be prepared to put forward visions which may, in fact, deliver some difficult news but necessary news, and that's the way we're going about things. That's why I've suggested a whole lot of proposals which are in relation to reducing the tax concessions on super, which are difficult. You meet criticism, it's not popular, but we actually believe that if you walk forward and you present an outline to people, you will ultimately get a result.